evening, I'm Britt Clennett in Hong Kong and welcome to ViuTV News. Coming up on tonight's show. Just about a week before Chief Executive CY Leung steps down, the government pushes through plans to scrap the controversial MPF offsetting mechanism. CE-elect Carrie Lam refuses to challenge Beijing over the missing booksellers case, saying it's not appropriate to meddle with what happens on the mainland. And ousted South Korean President Park Geun-hye is confident is handed a 3-year jail term after soliciting gains for her daughter. Well, in a surprise move, the government announced today it is scrapping the whole MPF offsetting mechanism. However, there's no set date being made when the plan will come into effect. To ease employers' worries, the administration said there will be no back payments. Also, a 10-year grace period will be introduced once the scheme is officially abolished. During this period, the government will offer up to $7.9 billion in subsidies to ease employers' financial burden. At present, long service and severance payments are calculated by taking 2/3 of a person's last monthly salary and multiplying it by his or her years of service. Under the government's plan, the 2/3 base would be lowered to just half, but the employee would also get to keep his or her entire MPF. Well, more homes to be built. The government plans to put 3 plots of land on sale from July to September, which is expected to produce more than 1,300 flats. The sites are located on Lantau Island, Tai Po and Cheung Sha Wan. Along with other private development and redevelopment projects, more than 6,700 flats will be made available in the second quarter of the year. Responding to questions on whether the administration will force developers to build flats above a minimum size, the development chief said a balance has to be struck.
We are closely monitor the situation, and we need to strike a reasonable balance between the demand of the private sectors and also the users. Some of them may need to have a small flats to accommodate those smaller size of families. So we'll closely monitor the situation, and if necessary, we can impose conditions on the minimum flat size.
Incoming leader Carrie Lam won't be touching the controversial detention of Hong Kong booksellers in mainland China. She said it would be inappropriate to challenge what happens on the mainland and that the case needs to be dealt with, quote, in accordance with the mainland system. In an interview with CNN, the CE-elect said she understands the Causeway Bay booksellers case prompted fears about the erosion of the one country, two systems principle and the city's rule of law. But she said evidence was needed before concluding what happened and assured the public that only local authorities can carry out the enforcement of laws in Hong Kong. This comes just days before she takes office and is set to stir up the opposition as she appears in Legco for her first CE question and answer session on July the 5th. Well, according to sources, details for an expected visit by President Xi Jinping to celebrate the city's 20th handover anniversary have emerged. This would be Xi's first visit since he took office in 2013. The Chinese leader said is expected to stay for 3 days from June 29th to July 1st, accompanied by the First Lady Peng Liyuan. It's believed Xi will meet current and incoming government officials. He will also oversee the swearing-in ceremony of Carrie Lam and her team on July 1st. Authorities in Hong Kong are taking no chances on security during Xi's visit, with all police officers set to be on duty. And moving away from Hong Kong. Meantime, the Chinese president is facing mounting pressure over North Korea. This comes as US officials say Pyongyang has carried out yet another test of a new rocket engine, which could be part of its efforts to build a missile capable of reaching American soil. Samantha Battis has more.
North Korea testing international patience once again on Thursday. The US telling Reuters that Pyongyang has test-launched another rocket engine in what officials believe could be part of its program to develop an ICBM. It comes just a day after the US piled more pressure on China to tighten the belt on North Korea over its weapons program. Donald Trump has warned that a major conflict with Pyongyang is possible, though US officials say tougher sanctions are the way forward. The head of US Defence Intelligence has warned of the threat if the North is left unchecked, saying it's on an inevitable path to obtaining a nuclear-armed missile capable of striking America.
And moving on to our next story now, staying in the region and to Seoul, where a close friend of disgraced former President Park Geun-hye has been given 3 years in prison for abuse of power. As Joseph Kim reports, this is only the first among a string of sentences Choi Soon-sil is expected to face in the scandal that has rocked the country's business and political elite.
Choi Soon-sil, a central figure in the massive corruption scandal in South Korea, was sentenced 3 years in prison by the Seoul Central District Court. The corruption scandal, which triggered months of protests in South Korea, demanded that former President Park Geun-hye be removed from office, which eventually led to her impeachment. Now, Choi Soon-sil was a close confidant of Park Geun-hye, and the Seoul court found her guilty of obstruction, using her influence and ties with Park Geun-hye to gain favors for her daughter. Now, she pleaded not guilty to these charges, but 6 others also involved in the crime were given prison sentences, with the Seoul court saying that she committed too much wrongdoing to consider the actions out of love as a mother who wants what's best for her child. Now, this ruling is just the first of the many charges Choi Soon-sil faces, including some others that Park Geun-hye is directly involved with, and that is taking bribes from South Korea's largest conglomerates.
To the US now, where Democrats are blasting a new Republican effort to replace Obamacare as heartless. The draft health care bill, which was put together in secret and unveiled on Thursday, proposes to drop a tax on the wealthy and reduce aid to the poor to cut costs. The contentious bill sparked angry protests across the US, which led to dozens of arrests. The proposal was welcomed by President Donald Trump, who called the last draft mean. But a few Republican senators, including Ted Cruz, have said they're not ready to vote for this bill yet. Democrats only need 3 Republicans' support to quash the bill.
Now, why are they doing all this? To provide a giant tax break for the wealthiest Americans. Simply put, the bill will result in higher costs, less care. Millions of Americans will lose their health insurance, particularly through Medicaid. The president has said that the Senate bill needed heart. The way this bill cuts health care is heartless.
And staying with US politics, President Donald Trump has denied he recorded any of his conversations with James Comey. This comes after Trump earlier suggested he might have recordings that could damage the former FBI director who was sacked last month. In a tweet, the US president said, "I did not make and do not have any such recordings of Comey." The White House defended Trump's statement, saying he has laid out his position on whether or not he was personally involved. Lawmakers investigating allegations of Russian meddling in last year's US presidential election had asked the White House for any such recordings. Coming up next, the latest from the world of business. And let's start with a look at today's market action. Hong Kong stocks ended the week unchanged. The benchmark Hang Seng Index ended flat, closing at 25,670 points. That's amid concerns that US equity firm MSCI's decision this week to include China-listed shares to its emerging market benchmark could weaken the city's role as a gateway to mainland investment. Well, shares of China Unicom surged following reports Alibaba Group and Tencent will pump a total of around $10 billion into the mobile carrier. The move is said to be part of Beijing's efforts to rejuvenate state behemoths with private cash. Reports added China Unicom plans to raise about 70 billion yuan through its Shanghai unit. It would mark the largest capital raising in Asia since insurer AIA's initial price offering in 2010. China Unicom is one of China's 3 major state-owned telcos, along with China Mobile and China Telecom. Enthusiasts flocked to the English seaside town of Felixstowe as the world's largest container ship docked in Britain for the first time. OOCL Hong Kong sailed all the way there from Shanghai via the Suez Canal and will serve the Asia-Europe trade lane from there. It has some mighty impressive statistics. The ship can carry up to 21,000 containers. And to give you an idea of just how big that is, its hull is said to be 4 times the size of London's Big Ben. That's pretty big. Well, the biggest banks in the US all cleared the stage of the Federal Reserve's stress tests, showing they'd be able to maintain enough capital in an extreme recession. In the Fed's most severe scenario, the tests showed the banks would suffer $383 billion in loan losses. But their level of high-quality capital would still be substantially higher than the threshold regulators demand, and an improvement over last year's level. The Fed introduced the stress tests following the 2008 global financial crisis to keep the health of the banking industry in check. And American Airlines CEO Doug Parker says he's confused and bewildered by the rival Qatar Airways' interest in becoming a major shareholder in the carrier. One possibility is that it wants to soften the airline's lobbying against Persian Gulf carriers from expanding into the US. Fred Katayama has more.
Qatar Airways wants to buy as much as 10% of American Airlines. That's what the U.S. carrier said in a regulatory filing. Its CEO says it's not particularly excited by Qatar's interest. American says the stake is worth at least $808 million. Qatar Airways says it's an investment opportunity. The company added it doesn't want to get involved in American Airlines operations or management. Investors cheered the news, sending shares of the U.S. carrier up on Thursday. Eric Wiegand, senior portfolio manager at U.S. Bank, points to several factors behind the sector's recent rally.
They've experienced much better capital control and management, so valuations have become compelling, and it has been noticed by investors.
The investment comes as Qatar Airways is taking a hit from diplomatic turbulence involving its home country. 5 Arab nations cut diplomatic and economic ties with Qatar this month for, as